You are not what you think you are, but what you think you are. Hey, welcome to Proverb Peddling. I'm your wisdom dealer, Parker Sedecase, and this is a show where I help you understand a proverb and a saying, the words of the wise, and their riddles in order that you may live a life of wisdom. In this episode, I'm going to be covering the phrase, you're not what you think you are, but what you think you are. Now, this is a nice little saying, but it can mean different things depending on how you interpret the different parts of the phrase. So I'm going to analyze those and help us think through it. Let's jump right in. You are not what you think you are, but what you think you are. This saying is a quintessential gnomic statement. It's short, it's pithy, it's terse, it's profound, and it's got some punch to it. You are not what you think you are, but what you think you are. It actually makes for a pretty good little mantra. Now, I know this because I've been practicing it ad nauseum in preparation for episode 2 of this podcast, Proverb Peddling, for a long while now. Now, I'm not exactly sure where this saying comes from. I've seen it attributed to Norman Vincent Peale, William James, Brian Tracy, and others. But wherever it came from, it's here now and it's worth reflecting on because this saying provides a profound and often needed check on one's self-conception. But while it makes for a good aphorism, I can't keep saying it over and over. So let me just refer to the whole saying as the saying from now on. So again, the saying is, you are not what you think you are, but what you think you are. Now, the first half of the saying is pretty straightforward. You are not what you think you are. Another way to say it goes like this. You're not your own conception of yourself. Your self-image is mistaken, inaccurate, or incomplete. The second half of the saying is meant to draw out a profound way of revealing what you actually are. You are the thoughts that you have, not merely your self-conception. So, for example, you may think of yourself as a kind person, but in reality, perhaps the majority of your thoughts about other people are hypercritical, judgmental, and downright wicked. In such a case, according to the saying, you are not a kind person, but kind of a prick. Now, you may be thinking, that doesn't add up. Who cares what I'm thinking so long as my actions are kind? If my actions are kind, then I count as a kind person, regardless of my inner thought life. Rachel Dawes says something akin to this to Bruce Wayne in Batman Begins. She says, Bruce, deep down, you may still be that great kid you used to be, but it's not who you are underneath. It's what you do that defines you. But this sort of knee-jerk, pragmatic notion misses the importance of the thoughts or intentions or reasons or whatever mental terminology you like, which accompany and determine our actions. It's these kinds of thoughts that are the things which make our actions interpretable. It's not as though actions are some objective things we can perform devoid of intentions. In fact, it seems to me like an action without an intention isn't really an action at all, but are more akin to an involuntary spasm of some kind. An action without an intention isn't morally praiseworthy or blameworthy. If I kick my dog while sleepwalking, then that's unfortunate, but I'm not morally blameworthy for it. But if upon waking I decide to kick my dog for some reason or another, then I am blameworthy. Our intentions matter. They shape our actions. Consider an action which was intended for evil but which brought about a good by accident. This ought not count as a morally praiseworthy action in the perpetrator's book. Would we praise an assassin who missed his shot on a senator and accidentally killed another assassin wielding a knife just behind the senator instead? No. Of course not. So all this to say, I think a knee-jerk, pragmatic response to the saying is no good. What you think really does matter because what you think shapes and determines your actions. So your thoughts matter, but how much do your thoughts matter? What do your thoughts tell us about you? Is it true that what you think you are? Well, it depends. There are at least 2 different ways that we can interpret the second clause of the saying. One of which I think is true and good and beneficial. The other of which I think is totally incorrect. So let me break it down and show you what I mean. I'm going to cover the 2 interpretations of the saying, starting with the wrong one first. So here's the wrong interpretation of the saying. Let's call it interpretation 1. And it goes like this. Your thoughts constitute your personal identity. Now, on this first way to interpret the saying, your thoughts are what you are. That is, your thoughts constitute you. So you're not your self-conception. Instead, you're literally the thoughts that you have. In grammar and logic, there's this thing called a copula, which is just some form of be or being that serves as a connecting word. So think am, is, are, was, were, those kinds of things. Now, on this first interpretation of the saying, the copula are in what you think you are is functioning as a copula of identity. Now, this usually goes by the name the is of identity, but here we have are functioning in the same way instead. But we still need to say more to flesh out the idea that you are your thoughts, because there are actually 3 potential ways to take this notion of the copula of identity. So, sorry. Let's call this interpretation 1A. You are all of your thoughts. That is, you are the sum total of everything you've ever thought. Now that's a bit odd, right? Who's keeping track? On this view, it seems only God would know who you are, and we can kiss self-knowledge goodbye because we're not God. So I thought I'd just broach this one since it's a possible interpretation, even though it's not very plausible. So let's go to the second way to flesh out the idea that you are your thoughts. It goes like this. Call it interpretation 1B. You are all of the thoughts that you can recall. All those thoughts that enjoy a type of access consciousness, those available to introspective and active recall. Now this seems a little bit arbitrary. What if I'm groggy today and can't recall as many thoughts as I could yesterday? Or what happens to me when I have a dreamless sleep? Is there some core number of thoughts that I need to be able to recall in order to retain my personal identity? This interpretation seems more plausible than 1A, but it still doesn't seem great. So let's go on to interpretation 1C, and this is the last one, I promise. You are your pattern of thoughts. So you're not what you think you are, but what you think you are, and what you think happens to be the pattern of thoughts that you have. Not necessarily the sum total of all your thoughts, and not some special core of thoughts that need to make up you, but actually the pattern of thoughts that you have. You are a thought pattern on this view. But what about personal identity over time? The pattern of my thought changes, sometimes dramatically, and yet I'm still me, right? How much continuity with past selves do I need to maintain in order for the pattern of thoughts to still count as me? And what about pattern duplication? If the pattern of my thoughts is duplicated in another mind, say by a systematic brain scan or a futuristic 3D printer, then which pattern of thoughts am I? This seems like a problem for personal identity, though this interpretation is definitely the most plausible of the three I just gave. Now, these three interpretations of the saying are all identity claims, and they run into odd problems because you just are not the same thing as your thoughts. Let's say your thoughts are temporarily destroyed. Maybe you get amnesia or an alien zaps you with their thought-changing ray gun, but then let's say your pattern of thought returns to you at a later time. Did you cease to be you for a time and then continue being you later? I don't think so, but maybe you have different intuitions than me. It seems to me like you can survive the destruction of your thoughts, but that your thoughts can't survive the destruction of your thoughts. Like, obviously. So if that's the case, then you and your thoughts are two different things with different properties. You have this property of being able to survive the destruction of all your thoughts, but your thoughts don't have that same property. So different properties, different things. But if that's the case, then this interpretation of the saying and its various possible interpretations confuse the product of the mind, our thoughts, with our minds themselves, which is the producer of thoughts. Our minds are not our thoughts. We may or may not be rightly identified with our minds. Are you a mind? Is your mind just an aspect of your being, or your soul? What are we talking about? That's a topic for another time. For now, it suffices to establish that the mind and the products of the mind, like thoughts or perceptions, conceptions, memories, etc., are not one and the same thing. You have thoughts. You are not thoughts. So let's go to what I think is the right interpretation of the saying. I think it's still a wise and beneficial saying if we interpret it along a copula of predication instead of a copula of identity. Now, predication is just the assignment of something to a class or an affirmation of something about something else. X is Y, Z is W. So here's a quick example of the difference between identity claims and copulas meant for predication. Parker is dumb is predicating dumbness of Parker and using the is of predication. Clark Kent is Superman is an identity claim identifying Clark Kent with Superman. Clark is Superman. They're one and the same person. So I don't think the saying is all that great if interpreted along identity lines, but if it's interpreted as predicating something of the thinker, then maybe it's still a wise sentiment. So here's interpretation 2. Your thoughts expose or reveal or betray the kind of person that you are. Now, according to this interpretation, the saying would mean something like this. You're not the kind of person you think you are. Instead, you're the kind of person that your thoughts reveal you to be. So again, you may think that you're a pretty good person, but if the majority of your thoughts are bad thoughts, then you're actually a bad person. Now, this interpretation will probably suffer from some vagueness problems as well, like how many thoughts need to be bad in order to predicate badness of the thinker, etc. But at least this interpretation can be examined by the thinker through first-person analysis. I mean, you can sit down and think about the thoughts you've had for the past week, and you can consider and reconsider the quality of your character based on what you remember of your thoughts. Now, sure, your memory could be skewed, but that's actually part of the whole point of the saying. Give thought to your thoughts and re-examine yourself in light of them, rather than merely deferring to your naive conception of yourself. So you're not what you think you are, but what you think you are. Now, I've probably analyzed this pithy little gnomic saying into oblivion by now, and I'm sorry about that. I don't want very many of my proverb peddling episodes to be like this, but this saying has been chewing a hole in my mind for a while now, and I had to do this to get it out. I think it's a beneficial saying if we interpret it as a tool for self-knowledge, but I think it's incorrect if we interpret it as a statement of personal identity. So, Lord willing, I can be rid of the saying now. May it not bore a hole in your mind. Well, all has been considered. For those who have ears, let them hear. This has been Proverb Peddling. If you like this episode, then leave me a like and a comment here on YouTube. Leave me a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And consider supporting my work by becoming a paid subscriber over on my Substack. You can find that link in the description. If this episode made you think, then make sure to leave me a little thinking emoji in the comments. And if you have a wise saying that you think I need to know about, make sure to leave that in a comment as well. And until next time, embrace wisdom.